It's time for the District 4 Report, presented to you by Professor Diggs himself, only on PowerPointBearcats.com. Class begins now.
Hello, friends. It is the Professor Matt Diggs, and welcome to the District 4 3A Report. We're going to do what we do every week. We are going to look back, we're going to look ahead, and we're going to look further. And the way we look back is we look at how I predicted the point spreads to be out. We'll check out some of the key leaders in some of those games, and then we'll talk about what's coming up this week. Now, last week, I picked Brock by 27 over Whitesboro. I thought that would be a game that Brock would struggle a little bit and put things together at the end, and we'll talk about how they did. They won by 21, so I was pretty close on that one. Peaster versus Bowie. I thought Peaster would win that game by 17. They ended up winning that game by 15. I was wrong on a game, ladies and gentlemen. I did take Ponder over Boyd last week, and Boyd on their homecoming took care of business. They won by 7, and then I thought Pilot Point would beat Paradise by 13, and they won by 14. So all in all, things pretty much aligned as I thought they would, and let's kind of break down how some of those games ended up. Whitesboro and Brock, for me, I go back and forth on Brock because I have been critical on Brock on Twitter at Professor Diggs, if you'd like to check those criticisms out, where I thought that Brock would be a little bit down this year. They have a new coach, they have a new philosophy, and when things go as well as they've gone for Brock, having a coaching change can sometimes put things in a little bit of a disarray. If you'd like to look at some of the big schools, look at Cedar Hill, for instance. Once they lost their coach, things are not bad at Cedar Hill, but they're not state championship every year good, and I think that's the standard that Brock has set, is to be competing for a state championship every year. And that Whitesboro-Brock game was 21-21 and a half, and Whitesboro actually was winning 21-14 in the second quarter, really on the heels of turnovers. 2 turnovers led to those 14 points for Whitesboro. But Brock, I think, got a little annoyed that they were losing 21-14, and they outscored Whitesboro 28-0 for the rest of that game, and pretty much dominated after that 21-14 deficit that they had. And really, the thing I really like about Brock is it's a well-rounded team. As we're going to talk about, some of the big stars finally got going. We'll talk about for Pilot Point that I think this was Ish Harris's best game, and a name that I hadn't seen much for Brock in the box scores, but really stepped up this week is Nathan Jones, that tight end. 4 catches for 95 yards are starting to get him more on the offensive side of things. Tyler Moody had a big week for Brock, the quarterback, 18 for 29, 285 yards and 3 touchdowns. And Cutter Wilson is really making a name for himself as a workhorse as well. 32 carries, 197 yards, 2 touchdowns. And I think that's the thing about Brock, is that they're so multiple and they have so many ways that they can beat you. They have Nathan Jones, who, if you got the fourth quarter or a 2-point play and you need that kind of conversion, you know who they're going to, and they've got that kind of player. Cutter Wilson really being able to take a lot of carries and eat up a lot of clock. And then Zach Brewster, the defensive star for Brock, with 6 tackles, and really, again, a standout. Whitesboro, Mac Harper went 14 for 27, 209 yards. And I think for Whitesboro, what I look at is that they don't really run very well. Asher Contreras, 9 carries for 43 yards. And one might note, well, maybe that's Brock's defense, and we'll kind of be watching that. But if they can't consume yards, I don't think they're going to do very well against Pilot Point, which is this week, and we'll talk about that coming up. And it really kind of makes me wonder about their long-term playoff ramifications, because really, even though Brock is expected to be the first place team in this district, the winner of Pilot Point and Whitesboro, in my opinion anyway, could end up having the longest playoff run of this district. And all you got to do is be there. If you're not, you can't make it to the 5th round if you're not in the 4th round. And I think there are very favorable outcomes for either Whitesboro or Pilot Point to make it to the 4th round. And then you got to play either a Jim Ned or a Brock again. And those are obviously tall orders, but you can't win that game if you don't get there. So I think Whitesboro is going to have to get better at the running game, if they can get better at the running game, to do that. But again, the fact that they were so competitive with Brock for so long and got a couple of turnovers makes this game against Pilot Point interesting this week. Bowie Peaster was a game that Bowie dominated for the first half. They were up 22-7 early in the second quarter, 20-14 at halftime. But Peaster, very much like Brock, they posted a shutout in the second half. Parker County second half squads. Gunnar McElroy had 19 for 30, 252 yards, 3 touchdowns. Peaster's quarterback. Tramar Gilbert, kind of the do-everything, kind of the Ish Harris, if you will, of Peaster. 7 for 65 on the running game for a touchdown, 7 receptions, 52 yards. If you have him on your District 4-3A Report fantasy football team and you're in a PPR, you're probably pretty happy with Tramar Gilbert's effort. And then if you threw him on the defensive side of the ball, hopefully you got some points for that, because he got 2 sacks on the defense. And a name very much like a name I'm seeing recurring as one of the standout, perhaps all-district receivers, Aiden Cox for Pilot Point. Another name I keep seeing is Rhett Steen for Peaster, really standing out. 6 catches, 130 yards, and a touchdown. Did get some information for Bowie this week. Colby Miller, the quarterback, 11 for 27, 179 yards, a touchdown and an interception. And when I really look at this game, and I look at the fact that Bowie was in this game for a good chunk of the game, and for the first half they were pretty much dominating at times. But then I see the fact that they had 14 penalties, 116 yards of penalty yardage, and 2 turnovers. At least in this game, Bowie seems to be a team that just can't get out of its way. But at the same time, if they can correct some of those things, if they can shore up some of those turnover issues, and if they can deal with some of those penalties, this is a team that could steal a win from a 3rd, 4th, or 5th place team if they play their best game. And another team I feel like could steal a win, and they did. If you remember, I believe that Peaster and Paradise is going to be for the 4th spot. Well, 6, 7, 8 with Ponder, Boyd, and Bowie, I think is very wide open. And Boyd kind of stepped up as a team that elevated itself to maybe that 6th spot this week. They beat Ponder with a huge second quarter, a second half comeback, and Ponder was up 21-6 at halftime. I think that's an important thing to note. But Rendon Lamance, he had an all Wise County sort of day, 36 carries, 260 yards, and 3 touchdowns. As the quarterback, he also threw 9 for 19, not the best completion rating, but 108 yards and a touchdown. So 368 total yards for Boyd, and Boyd wins. And that really gets them as the best chance to steal one of those wins from a Whitesboro, Pilot Point, Peaster, or Paradise. So keep an eye on Boyd, because if Rendon Lamance if you can't stop him, Boyd can win games. And it was their homecoming, and a lot of things went right for Boyd, but they took care of business. We got Pilot Point and Paradise, a game that was a little bit not as close as the final score, 35-21, indicated. It was 28-7 early in the 4th quarter. It was 21-7 going into the 4th quarter, and both teams had an offensive explosion in the 4th quarter, each team scoring 2 touchdowns in the 4th quarter to give you that final 35-21 final. And what I really like about Pilot Point this week is that offensively they're starting to put it together multiply. They look a lot more like Brock as far as they can run the ball and they can throw the ball. And whereas you've got Cutter Wilson for Brock, who is just carrying a lion's share of the carries, got Pilot Point, who had 3 players who had 10 or more carries this week, all doing good things. You have Wyatt Smith, the quarterback, 11 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. You got that freshman, Gage Anderson. They just can't seem to take him off the field. They like feeding him, and Pilot Point Bearcat fans are excited because they get him for 3 more years after this year. The next Ish Harris, if you will. 17 carries for 108 yards. And again, that he's doing this kind of a workload as a freshman in 3A, I think is pretty impressive. Then you got Ish Harris. This is the first time since I've been doing the 4-3A report where he had significant workload put back on him. He had 21 carries for 202 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I mentioned him already in the breath of Rhett Steen. Aiden Cox, 5 receptions, 158 yards, 2 touchdowns. All he does is score touchdowns and make big plays. For Paradise, Paradise really goes as the quarterback goes. Carter Statenton, we talked about him last week. Pilot Point's defense held him to a very low completion rating, 8 for 22 for 155 yards, rushed the ball 14 times for 146 yards. Paradise, if they're going to beat Peaster for that 4th playoff spot, he is going to have to be more accurate, and they're going to have to continue that run game. And I think we're going to have a fun shootout when it's Peaster Paradise week. So that's kind of what happened last week. Everything pretty much happened as expected, other than the Boyd Ponder game, and now that changes the bottom half of the district, whereas I had Ponder in the 6th seed. Obviously, they can't be in the 6th seed since Boyd won, and that was Boyd's first win. I've got Boyd in that 6th spot right now, Ponder 7, and Bowie 8. But, the way that Bowie played for half anyways, I think that you could see that game go either way as of right now. Of course, Bowie had a couple of non-district wins already. So this week, really the big game, the only game of consequential matter, is for 2nd place. You got Pilot Point versus Whitesboro. And right now you're seeing Pilot Point really peaking at the right time. Pilot Point is a team that we've scratched our head on. They started out 1-2 going into district, and a lot of parity in this district. But I think that they've kind of separated themselves from Whitesboro right now. They can throw the ball, they can run the ball. It's kind of like what we're seeing with the Dallas Cowboys. Pick your poison. I like Pilot Point this week. Brock versus Ponder, not a great bounce back week for Ponder after losing this past week to Boyd. I think Brock is obviously going to have their way with Ponder. We got Peaster versus Boyd, and this is one of those trap games because you've got Peaster, who's flying high, 5-1 this year. I mean, they went undefeated in non-district, playing very well so far in district. This is the kind of win that Peaster has to have as they get to the big dogs in the district, and pretty much absolutely essential. Boyd's got to have this if they're going to have any sort of playoff hope. I like Peaster, but this is one of the games I'm going to be watching. And then Paradise versus Bowie. Again, for me, a little bit of a trap game as well, because I think Bowie is a little bit better than their 0-3 record indicates. I think it'll be a pretty close game, but I think Paradise will get the nod this week. You can tune into The Old Coach, which you can't really tune into, but you can direct your web browser to theoldcoach.com. Thursday morning at 10 a.m., I release all the picks and point spreads throughout all of the games in North Texas, East Texas, and kind of North Central West Texas, pretty much anywhere from Abilene to the Louisiana border, and kind of down to Waco and up to the Red River. Those teams across 6A and 2A, I'll pick every game and every point spread across all 5 11-man classes, 11-man football classes. So let's look a little more to the future and kind of see how things are moving along in Division 1, Region 1. And I think for the first time, I'm starting to see a little bit of separation between Pilot Point and the other middle tier teams. And the other middle tier teams in Region 1, I've got Shallow Water, I've got Bushland, I've got Wall, and I've got Early. I think all 4 of those schools, with Pilot Point and Whitesboro to that end, all 6 of those schools are within about a touchdown of each other, and one of those schools is probably going to be playing the winner of Jim Ned versus Brock for that regional championship in this Region 1. So very important. For the first time, I'm starting to see Pilot Point indicating that they are maybe a little bit above all those other teams. And this is obviously going to be a big week because Whitesboro could answer that challenge, and it could be the team that could have a chance to fight for that right to make it to the state semifinals and on the other half of the bracket. Shallow Water is a team that's not really going to be tested in their district. They pretty much have a full run. Denver City will give them a little bit of grief. But I think Denver City is more on the level of the fourth place team in this district, be it Paradise or Peaster. In my heart, I'm picking Peaster right now, but I think Paradise is talented enough. Carter Stainton has the talent to get Paradise to that next level. Jim Ned with a big victory over early this past week, and they get to play Wall this week, and pretty much their toughest two games was week 1 and week 2 of their district slate. And they dominated last week, and I expect them to dominate this week. In fact, in the whimsical game that I have where Jim Ned and Brock, I do a comparison every week on The Dump. The Dump is my Friday night Twitter show, which is more of a Saturday morning show. I had Jim Ned winning that one, so Jim Ned is now beating Brock 4-3 through 7 weeks of the season. I think Jim Ned has had more of the better performances of 4-3 when it comes to comparing those two teams. And right now, Jim Ned would have a slight advantage against Brock in that hypothetical third round game. So, big week for Pilot Point and Whitesboro. Big week, we got Jim Ned and Wall. That'll give us a little bit more information as well. And Bushland's only real battle for their district, they'll play Amarillo River Road this week as well. But it's good news for Pilot Point that I'm finally starting to see that improvement and that separation. But Whitesboro has every opportunity this week to answer that and raise them and be that team. But I will be taking Pilot Point this week. So that is the District 4-3A report. I appreciate you listening. We'll do this again next week. As always, you can @ me at Professor Diggs if you have any comments or criticisms. If I completely butchered a name or just completely disrespected a player or a team at the mouth, I don't think I'll ever disrespect a player at the mouth, but sometimes I'll disrespect a team at the mouth because sometimes you just whimsically say Team X is better than Team Y, and that just happens to be true sometimes. But definitely not going to be disrespecting any of our great talent in the District 4-3A lineup in the District 4-3A family. I am Professor Matt Diggs, and we will see you next week.